You probably will never get in one hall such a range of expertise and experience we have on our panel down the front. In no particular order of priority, but we have Alan Piper, who's a property consultant based in Brixton. She's been a chartered architect since 1978 and is a long-standing member of the Southside Chamber of Commerce. You probably also know him as Secretary of the Brixton Society, and he's published loads of books on local history and architecture. And if it's old and it's built and it's local, we know it. We have Christopher Proctor there. He is the lead author of the, and it's a snappy title, Conservation Area Toolkit for Retrofitting of Heritage Buildings. And it's from ACAN, and ACAN is the Architects Climate Action Network, set up to tackle the climate emergency. It's actually a very good document, about 60 odd pages, but it tells you a hell of a lot about all the things about windows, about walls, about roofs, about cold bridges, hot bridges, insulation, solar, architecture, the whole lot. It's brilliant. I mean, I do recommend it. It's good who's done it. And it's good holiday reading.
It does.
And he's a director of Proctor Real Architects in Islington, East London. And his practice is known for a seminal contemporary house in Brazil that was winner of the Riva Awards in 2005. So we'll be doing that as 5 visits for Brazil. Penny Stern has come along at very short notice. Penny isn't from Dulwich Estate, she's from the Dulwich Society, but has had a lot of experience of dealing with Dulwich Estate as a major landlord in the area, and who kind of has the guidelines of what is and is not possible to change in terms of your property if you are a Dulwich Estate property. We have Robert O'Sullivan. This one's good, here we go. He's Assistant Director, Development, Management and Enforcement, Sustainable Growth and Opportunity Directorate at Lambeth. I think that used to be known as the Planning Department. Not to be out of time, we have Tom Buttrick, who is a team leader of Climate Change and Digital Planning Lead, Planning Policy, Monitoring and Digital Transformation Team from Southwark. Okay, so let's competing to see how long their badges are on the doors of their offices. So we've got that as your team this evening. We're just going to start with a very short presentation from Alan, and then we're going to go straight into Q&A. And there's going to be a lot of them. We've got quite a few that have been sent down in advance. We want them from the floor. If you could try and not make it specific to the I want supplies for this and got turned down because it was 2 inches too long here and 1 foot too high, etc. type thing. They can't go into your personal details of a particular planning application. It's about guidelines and what to look for and what you might need planning permission for, what you don't, what might be a kind of grey area, that kind of thing. All right, so we're just going to start off with Alan.
Okay, we'll get the technology working. That's all.
You see anything on the display?
That's it, making a strange vibration. Okay, well, this is, can you hear me? Right, this is going to be a rather quick run through all the different sort of tracks that there are if you're considering doing something to your building. And particularly focusing on houses and flats, so I'm not going to go into commercial buildings, that would take too long. But just some of the obvious sort of restrictions or concerns that are going to crop up. So I'm not going to talk much about the technical side of how we do conserve energy with your building. That's been touched on earlier this evening, and also there'll be more on that on the other sessions anyway. But as I say, we're just trying to introduce some of the things you're likely to be able to do or not do. Let's see if we can actually move forward. Oh, yes. Okay, well, conservation areas have been around for a while, but there are sort of 2 different strands to it. we're probably more familiar, and I think our planning department are more familiar with conserving the historic character, that sort of thing. So they've got sort of quite well thought out guidelines about that. I think a lot of them are still grappling with how they conserve energy and all the implications of that. And sometimes, of course, there's a conflict between the new sort of energy conservation measures and the more traditional sort of architectural feature side of things. So on the right, a very familiar piece of one of the local conservation areas. On the left, it's actually an extension to the London School Division I mentioned, but they've managed to include a green roof and a proper roof garden as part of their development. So a lot of the things that actually go into a building might not even actually be visible from down the street level, but there is a whole lot going on. Again, one of our familiar listed buildings. Anything to do with a listed building is possible. You can even knock it down. But the key thing is that you actually have to ask nicely. You can't just go ahead and do something to it. So you have got to go through some sort of planning application or listed building application process. You've got to persuade the council and the powers that be that what you want to do is a good idea. And incidentally, this does actually have a ground source heat pump recently installed. So, no, things are possible. Conservation areas, well, it will always depend on what the conservation area is about. I was asked to advise on one of these properties. This is a little 1950s terrace, part of the Brockwell Park conservation area. It's in the conservation area because it forms the enclosure of the park. The houses themselves not terribly distinguished. One of the owners was thinking of having a patch of solar panels on the front roof. Now, it's not the house in the middle there which has got the solar thermal panels on it. Those were put up long before it was a conservation area. But when we looked at this, we found that not only would the council not like having panels on the front roof, the orientation was not very good anyway. It's actually facing north-northwest, and is also partly screened by trees in the park. So we ended up putting lots of panels on the back of the house, which you can only see in the depths of winter as you go past on the train. The rest of the time it's hidden by the button. Article 4 directions are a sort of more extreme form of measure in conservation areas where you may actually need permission for things like window changes. You may even have restrictions on the colour you can paint the front door. It will vary from one area to another, but it's usually because they felt that to maintain the character, they had to introduce extra restrictions. Can also be significant for commercial buildings because land has certainly agreed a number of Article 4 directions recently to protect lots of their commercial and industrial buildings from being turned into flats. Flats and maisonettes are a special case in the sense that almost anything you want to do externally to them will need planning consent. This is something that people living in flats often forget, but then they decide they want to have some French windows put in, and they forget that they actually need to get consent from the council, as well, of course, from their landlord too, who will have a say in what goes on. So it is very important to remember that almost anything that's going to be visible on the outside with a flat or maisonettes is going to need planning consent. Family houses, now these are the ones where you can, to a very large extent, do all manner of things. Exactly what you can do will depend on, is it a detached house, like on the left, is it a semi-detached house, or is it terraced houses? So these affect exactly how much you can extend without permission, and some of the other things that we may need to do. But by and large, it has suited the central government to put a lot of the minor works, which you might call them, into permitted development categories, so planning parts not totally swamped with lots of really small scale applications. And here we are, permitted development. The example on the left, I would say what I like about this one because it's actually in-house, so not local. But here somebody's done everything he can think of. So he's got a rear extension across the full width. He's got a loft extension up above, and he's also got a sort of outbuilding across the back of the garden. He is actually in trouble with his local council because there is other things he's doing as well. But there is a lot you can do without actually getting caught, as it were. And the example on the right is actually a former public house. And again, as I said, certain community development is possible for commercial buildings in terms of extensions and some changes of use. Estate schemes and covenants, and I think this particularly will touch on the Doge estate schemes. Firstly, in historical terms, lots of the developments around, well, across South London, in fact, were built on a leasehold basis, and there were certain restrictions in the leases from the outset, saying no trades or professions to be carried on, no public houses, and various other things. So lots of restrictions on potential use, not so much about what you could do in terms of adding bits to the house, so forth. But a lot of those early restrictions were about maintaining the property values and therefore the rents that the landlord could collect. And an example on the right there is actually the Winnet estate, quite a long-standing estate and quite well and carefully developed over a period of time. And that was a casualty, in fact, of the 1968 Leasehold Reform Act, at which point the landlords decided to cash in and just sell the remaining interest in the estate to Lambeth Council. Doge Estate has got a sort of special arrangement, and we'll hear more about those a little later. Building regulations, finally, we could spend a whole evening on those. Just to say that this is entirely separate from planning. There are a few enlightened councils who actually put the building regulations information on the same web page as the planning information, but not that many. So they are, to a large extent, separate worlds within any particular town hall. And one positive thing I would say is that building inspectors and building control officers do tend to be quite positive and actually want you to come up with something which is legal and safe for people to actually live in. And they will generally be quite helpful in getting you there. Okay, well that's a very quick survey, and I'll leave it there, and we'll see what questions you come up with.
Thank you.
Thank you, Alan. Right, this is where we go to questions from the floor. I've got a few that are sent in advance, as they say. But queries from the floor now about planning, about what you're thinking, things like, okay, gentleman there, yeah. You can give your name and if it's anyone in particular, and when you don't mind who answers. Thank you.
Yeah, hi, Phil, good question for the planning team about air source heat pumps, because I believe that planning permission may be required if the heat pump's going to be within a metre of a neighbour. But my question is, I think that was set when air source heat pumps were big noisy things, and then that was more and quieter. So firstly, is that strictly necessary? And secondly, if it is, how long does that process take and how much does it cost roughly?
Rob, can you answer for Lambeth and then Tom for Suffolk? Yep.
Yes, thanks for your question. In terms of planning, what we're concerned with as the planning authority is development. So there's something in law is something development. If it is, it needs planning permission. What Alan has touched on there is permitted development. So the government has said there's too much development for planning authorities to deal with. In Lambeth, we probably deal with anything between 4,000 and 5,000 planning applications a year. So there's a lot going on. And what government has said is, let's take some of that away and give council owners permitted development rights, which means you can do certain things to a property without needing to come near the local planning authority. So in particular that's dwelling houses. Flats and mixed units, which Alan touched on, don't have permitted development rights. So if any of you do live in a flat, you will need to come in and seek planning permission. But in terms of air source heat pumps, there is permitted development rights for that. So the starting position is you do have permitted development. And here's the caveat, it is subject to certain conditions. So with the permitted development order, which it's a piece of legislation which gives permitted development, you do have PD subject to certain requirements. So as you said there, one of them is you have to be at least a metre away from the boundary with your neighbours. So if you want to put an air source heat pump against the wall of your neighbouring property, you don't get PD. You need to grant planning permission. So really what you need to do is look at those conditions, and if you fulfil them, you can get development rights. You don't need to come in and seek planning permission also, or offline with. So there are a number of conditions there. One of them is the cubic volume of the air source heat pump. So it's 0.6 square meters. So anything above that, it's too large in terms of PD. You need to come in and get planning permission. That's not to say you won't be given planning consent, but it's a threshold level between PD and you can come in, make a planning application with us, and we assess the application. The other thing just to bear in mind as well is if you have permitted development rights and you believe you tick all the boxes, you don't need to come in and have any discussion with SOLIC. What is highly recommended is there's an application process called a Certificate of Lawful Development. And what this is an application process where you submit the application to any government planning authority, so to Lambeth, to SOLIC, and say, listen, I tick all the boxes, I'm permitted development, I'd like you to give me a formal decision that says what I'm doing is PD. And where this is quite important is if at any stage you're looking at selling the property. So we deal with an awful lot of inquiries from conveyancing solicitors where someone has built an extension, they've done a loft conversion, they might put an air source heat on, they might put solar panels on the roof, they go to sell, and then the prospective purchaser says, "Oh, do you have planning permission for that?" "Oh, we didn't need planning permission. We did it under PD. Show me a piece of paper." So what a certificate of lawful development is, it's a formal decision from the council saying, you tick all the boxes, you have PD. And what we'll do is we'll assess that. It goes up on the council's website, we send you out the decision notice, and you have that for your records. And if at any stage you go to sell, you can show the conveyancing solicitors that. So I hope that answers the question in a very long-winded sort of way, but I think I've introduced the concept of PD for you.
Tom, do you have any differences across the board?
It's the same in Southern. Permitted development rights given to all English local planning authorities. But we totally recognise it's a question. It's a question of judgment. Does this proposal, air source heat pump, PD or not, or does it need planning consent? One of the things we do in Southern is we have on our website we have a digital tool you can go on, and it's called Find Out if you need planning permission, and it will tell you if you need planning permission or if it's PD. But then you can apply for a lawful development certificate. And that's a free service. You can come on and just log on to the front page of our website, and you can get asked a series of questions against the conditions that Rob outlined there, and it then obviously will give you a strong steer in terms of what steps and what avenue you take. The other thing we do in Southwark is we welcome conversation, and I'm going to say obviously I'm going to talk for them as well because they offer a great service as well. But we have a process called pre-application advice. So I've got an idea, I want to do this to my building, or I want to do this to my house. If your proposal relates to renewables or retrofit, we offer a free of charge pre-app service. And that's say £200, and you can come along, send us your details, send us the information about your proposal, and then we will, after a period of time, give you a response on that. And that's just for renewables, because we recognise that kind of the uncertainty around delivering all of these new technologies, and planning is just one part of this whole process. As we've heard this evening, we want to reduce that. And if we can have good, meaningful early conversations before you take the plunge. We're there to assist.
Right?
Chris, do you want to come in?
Yeah, I just want to add.
Hello.
I just want to say that this is changing all the time, and everything about retrofit is new. Councils are learning. In Islington, we've had to use political pressure to get some of the changes that you're talking about. Islington is going to hire a retrofit specialist in the planning team to just deal with retrofit, because a lot of planners don't know all the ins and outs of retrofit. And there's a problem of funding, of planning departments being underfunded, and with budget cuts in government, they're not having enough staff. If everybody who wanted to retrofit suddenly started putting applications in, it would swamp the system. In Islington, we figured out that if everybody did planning applications, it would double the planning applications every year for 8 years. So the planning department would have double the number. So that means that something has to change in terms of providing a better sort of simple guide. And I think a lot of people like you coming here don't know what you can and can't do. And it's a responsibility of the council, because if they look at the workload possibly coming, they need to provide some sort of plan to educate, a simple guide, clearly what you can and can't do to avoid, all of the manpower that is this system now currently has to support. So I think things will change. Just wanted to say that, that this is something that isn't perfect. And I'll talk later about some of these other things.
Charles, just before we move on, if I may, Tom reminded me of something which is digital planning. I think we're now in a new world of government want to introduce digital planning. They're funding a number of initiatives around digital planning. One of them is the PlanX tool, which Tom talked about, which Southwark have rolled out, where you can answer a series of yes or no questions, a bit like booking a flight on Ryanair. You go along, you tick the boxes, and eventually you get to the end, and it says you can do it. The government has a really good website which has been up and running for a number of years, and it's a planning portal. And if you just Google planning portal, it'll bring you up, and it's set up for both planning and building control. And in that, there's a series of interactive 3D homes. And they show the most common projects that, as householders, you will potentially want to do. So whether it's extending your loft, a ground floor rear extension, a forced floor rear extension, leaving your driveway, and so forth. And you can click on that and it'll give you an indication of whether it's likely to be developed or not, and what the conditions around it. So it's well worth looking at. Within my service, it's something that we still go to as the forced protocol. Really useful too.
Thank you. Penny, do you want to say anything about the Dulwich estate? Hold the mic as close as possible. You've got looks of hearing it back.
This, as many of you that have property on the Dulwich estate are aware, it's like another planning permission, except it's really only interested in things that affect the external appearance of your property. And they are working, as I'm from Dulwich Society, not the estate, but we work quite closely. We look at the comment on applications to the estates. I think it's worth saying also that many of us, our properties are in conservation areas, and the guidance at the moment, which is on the planning board, is very clear that heat pumps should not be in front gardens. Ideally, they should be situated at the side and rear of the property, so they don't cause damage to the character of the area. So it's a balance between trying to preserve the character of an area, as Alan said, but also facilitating retrofit and improvements.
Thank you, Penny. Just a clarification, you said the size of if you're going for an air source heat pump, 0.6 meters, is that height or cubic size or what?
It's cubic. Sorry, yeah, it's cubic meters rather than square meters. Apologies.
Okay. There isn't such a thing as an average air source heat pump, but let's say for a 2-bedroom house, would the typical heat pump be within that, or would it need to be bigger than that? And is it 3-bedroom, 4-bedroom, roughly, depending, is there a kind of rule of thumb that says by the time you've got to 4-bedroom or 5-bedroom, if you'd be lucky enough to have that, it will be bigger than 0.6 cubic meters?
I see Chris nodding there. I'd probably defer to architectural colleague if.
I think the standards were set so that it would be covering domestic. I think bigger than that is really more commercial. I mean, most heat pumps are 400 or 500 deep. And so you think if they're a meter high, they're still within that. So I don't think it's a problem. I think we've considered that. And heat pumps are getting smaller. There are different ways of doing it. You know.
Okay. Next question. Got somebody back there?
Good evening, my name's Paul. I've been part of the way through the process of securing planning permission for an air source heat pump. I've been part of the way through the process of seeking planning permission for an air source heat pump in Lambeth. I had to pay twice to get reasonable information from 3 application questions before I got a clear answer. It would be very helpful if there was a faster and cheaper way of getting information. It was necessary to seek information because, in fact, there was quite a lot of misinformation from installers about this. I have gone through the process with installers and they've given me a system, suggested a system without mentioning the need for planning permission, even though they knew that it would be possible to install the heat pump without it being within the property. And the last time I did it, the person mentioned it as a throwaway remark at the very end of the conversation. It does seem that there's a lot of misinformation. There was an article in the Times which suggested that you only need to get planning permission if you're going through the boiler upgrade scheme, and if you weren't, you didn't need planning permission. And again, I think that that's misinformation. So, can anyone tell me, is it likely that this is going to change? Are people looking at how you can retrofit in areas such as in London, where it's quite likely that if you install an air source heat pump, it will be within 1 meter boundary of somebody else's property?
Tom, do you want to say anything from Sonic's point of view?
In terms of setting the criteria within PD, that's at national level. I've not heard anything to suggest that there's going to be any changes yet. However, obviously, it is the changes to the planning system is consistently evolving, legislative regime with guidance, etc. So, in terms of any changes, not that I'm aware of, I don't know, Rob, if you have anything.
No, I'd agree, Tom. I think planning at times can be like throwing a cargo ship. It's quite difficult to bring in policy. It's a plan-led system, first and foremost. So in determining planning applications, we do determine in accordance with policies in development plans. Government are now looking at updating national policy, which is the National Planning Policy Framework. So they've gone into consultation Christmas week, funny enough, on updates to the NPPF, and that closes in early March. So Lambeth and Suffolk will be providing comments on that. But in terms of guidance, we in Lambeth are currently working through an update to our design guidance. So that's on our website at the moment. We consulted last summer. We're currently going through quite a lot of representations received. Retrofit, as other panel members have said, is quite a new subject. I think we're all grappling as planners to get up to speed on what it means. Because, I think every couple of months it is changing. So we want to ensure that the guidance document we do produce, and hopefully we do adopt and put in the public domain, is there for the medium to longer term. So yes, if you were to go on the Lambeth website and just Google our design code, SPV, which stands for Supplementary Planning Document, there is a section in that on retrofit at the moment. So we're very alive to the fact that anyone making alterations to the properties will have retrofit questions. So there is some commentary on that. I think when we release the next version of this document for public consultation, it is definitely going to have more around retrofit. But yes, as decision makers, we're very much alive that it is ever evolving, and we need to keep apprised of that.
Thank you. Chris, do you want to come in?
Actually,
Keep it as close as possible.
yes, I think.
Tom.
Well, local authorities have quite a bit of power. They have more power than they realise. And they can do supplementary planning guidance, which can cover urban design guidelines, net zero, retrofit. They can write these applications almost as pattern books so that the local residents can follow a good way of carrying out something that will need planning by following these guidance. Of course, you would do a particular application yourself, but if you read the local guidance, then you know what you can expect. And there's also conservation area guidance that documents, and these they have to do by law. Some councils have contradictory guidance, and guidance isn't up to date, and that's what we're finding. Some conservation area guidance documents are very old, 20 years or more. In Islington, 34 of the 41 conservation areas are more than 20 years old. They're 5 pages. They're very bullet points of what you could or couldn't do, and they don't apply anymore. Building codes have changed, energy has changed, but they don't have the funding to go and rewrite them. I know that Southwark is starting to rewrite. There's a recent one. There's some recent ones coming, but still they're writing them as a historical reference guide, and they're very interesting about how a neighborhood evolved, and they aren't really getting to the grip with retrofit, and that should be part of conservation area guidance. Particular detailed analysis in this particular state with these particular styles. This is how you could retrofit. Some councils have started to do this. If you look around the country, Westminster, Camden are ahead in some ways. I'll just say briefly, the problem has been in areas where Westminster has 78% of the total area in conservation. Kensington and Chelsea is 73%. Camden and Islington are 50%. Here, it's about 30% in Lambeth and Southwark. It's about 30%. So inner London boroughs have a big area of buildings within conservation. And so that is a challenge. And there is an obligation to write these documents and keep them up to date. And what's happening is councils are now starting to do it. Islington is doing a net zero, but it's going to take 18 months to write it. So they're going to do a temporary simplified guide, which will give people an idea of what you can do now. They're also putting a retrofit planner to take the things that might be denied and to look at them from an expert point of view until this guidance is written. There's going to be a delay in the guidance that's coming forward as things change. So this is where we as residents can do political action to try to push through some funding or get some of this in place. What I did with the conservation area toolkit was to say, what if you took a conservation area, how far could you adapt it toward net zero? What could be like the ultimate that you could do? And that's looking at windows and external wall insulation and all these things to try to push the council to say they need to give us more than they've been giving us. And I'll just say a couple of stats. I found that 44% of the buildings could have external wall insulation in the private realm. External wall insulation is a really good thing because it covers over the gaps, as was mentioned earlier today, the gaps at floors, at walls, and it's a safer way to insulate an old building. But it's not very nice to look at. So you put it in the private, at the back of the property, and you don't really do it on listed buildings. So given those things, you could still get 44% of this one area that I studied with external wall insulation. So if you're doing that, and your neighbors know that that's possible, you could get a whole street external insulation on the back of a terrace on the street, rather than do house by house by house. We need to look at how we can do things on a grander scale. That'll bring down the cost. You'll work with your neighbor to try to do it at the same time, so it's less inconvenience. We need to be a bit bolder on these things, and we need to get to grips with what is possible and then how we can go there. There's a big argument about windows, replacement windows, and I'll get into that later, another time, because windows, some planners like replacement windows and some don't, and they won't approve them, even if they're damaged. And I found that in Georgian terraces, in North London, it's more Georgian. Here it's Victorian. In Georgian terraces, very few windows are original. They've been replaced. If you have an original window, you should not touch it. But if you've had a replaced window, if it's been replaced from 6/6 to 1/1, then it's gone against the particular Georgian style. So you could fix heritage and fix energy at the same time by allowing a true double glazed, well done to meet the standards of a Georgian sash. And these are the areas that we need to push harder on, where we can get some of this to happen. So that was the idea of the toolkit. You can download it. It's very technical. It's more meant really for planning departments, and it's meant for campaigners to sort of go in their area to see what can we do. It's on architectscan.org. So it's architectscan.org. And as was mentioned before, it goes into roof insulation, rear, wall insulation, windows, and there are new windows that will look very close to historic, and you will be difficult to tell that they are changed from historic windows with vacuum and other technologies. So there are ways to go forward. The problem is we need maybe the council giving us a better understanding of what we can do. And SPDs, if they're well detailed, can really do that. I'll just say Camden has a very good SPD that was written 2 years ago that goes house improvements of what you can and can't do. In quite good. It's still out of date now. It hasn't gotten. Everything is changing so fast that these things they can quickly change an SPD in the sense that they don't have to go through the process like you did with other types of local plans or other aspects. I'm kind of rambling on, so I'll stop. Yeah.
Does anyone know what 1/1 and 6/6 is?
Panes of
Absolutely, it's in the windows that used to have 6 on the top of the sash, is that right? 6 of those. SPD?
It's a supplementary planning document. It's basically a little guidance note produced by the borough council to amplify what's in their overall borough plan. So they may have a chapter in their borough plan about house operations or something like that, and then they'll produce something in a bit more detail in quiet moments, as it were, which will, literally explain more fully what they want. And that's also an opportunity to pick up extra sort of issues like sort of retrofit techniques that may be coming along. And as was said, they can be turned around rather more quickly than a complete borough plan, which takes several years.
Okay, answer that. Next question, please. Oh, sorry, yeah. Tom.
Yeah, just a kind of update from Southwark, and listening to sort of points here. And yes, Southwark is updating its household SPD this summer, but it does take a little time. So the interim idea, I think, is really is really interesting to follow, especially if it's been done like Islington, I think you said. The council is also working on dedicated guidance for climate and environmental policies as well in a supplementary planning document. We should be consulting on that after summer. And that is guidance for probably bigger schemes than the householder, but to basically setting out how we can deliver net zero buildings, looking at whole new kind of policy areas as well around predictive energy modelling, all that sort of thing. So there's lots of work happening, and I think it's how we can get that guidance out to be used in a lawful way. While we're still having to go through this statutory process of getting adopted, consulting on it, because as you say, this changes every 3 months. We need to respond to that.
Yeah. Rob, do you want to update where the land fund? You got the funding? Are you revising your policy at all?
Our local plan was adopted in September 2021. So it's roughly, we are required to update it every 5 years. So as soon as you adopt an old plan, you start work again. It's like painting Fort Bridge. You just start from the beginning again and work on it for the next 5 years. So there is a piece of work has started on. It will be a year or two before we consult on it. As Tom said, the SPDs or SPGs, we can turn around a lot quicker. So there is a number of them currently in production.
Okay, good. I'll take your question and then come to you.
My question's very quick, but I'm just trying to interpret what's being said this evening. The external walls insulation would be a really good way of going about things. Does that mean, so in a conservation area, those houses built of brick or brick that you can see can't be externally on the front side there, it can't be externally insulated, but those houses that are rendered or perhaps pebble dash could be. Because the issue with doing that is, certainly on a lot of houses, I know people have extended, people have eyeball doors, people have patio doors, so actually the amount of wall on the back of the house is quite small. But have I interpreted that right, that if you live in a brick house where the bricks are visible, that your options in the conservation area are reduced?
Can I come in on that one? I'd say, first of all, what are the guidelines for your particular conservation area? What made it a conservation area in the first place? What was special about it that it was designated for? Then I would say, if it's brickwork at the front, if it's a nice brickwork or some mixture of colour patterns or something like that, then you should try to keep it anyway. And I think the council would like you to do that too. But as I said, it's always a matter of asking nicely enough, as it were. So if you put any sort of proposition in, it might get accepted, might go through simply because nobody else bothers to object, or the planning officer was in a hurry. Although I should say that when you're in a hurry, it's more likely to just turn things down. I would say, do check what is critical about that particular conservation area, and I think there is probably a lot more scope for insulated render at the back of the building, but it will depend on the context. So as one of the examples I quoted, if it's sort of round the back and it's openable by immediate neighbours or from an overgrown railway cutting or something like that, then it may well be permissible. But I would say that always, for any planning proposal, you do not just draw up plans, fill in full and send it off to the council. We can't, that was maybe possible 30 years ago, but nowadays you will need some sort of design and access statement or planning statement explaining what you want to do and why you want to do it, and why you think it's the good thing. So it's not just a matter of putting something in, crossing your fingers or hoping that a large enough bribe will convince the council it's a good thing. I mean, most of us as households can't afford bribes anyway, that's for the larger development. Do something institutionalised, community infrastructure levy or section 106 agreement. Thank you.
Penny, do you want to comment on external insulation on the College Estate, what their policy may or may not be this week?
I think it's pretty helpful to say that at the moment the estate are working on guidance for retrofit measures that don't require consent, which they hope to publish in the very near future. And they look at schemes elsewhere. I think it's more likely that, again, that round the back, out of sight, they're much less concerned about. And it's often, if you're talking about a street of brick housing in a conservation area, it's about the character of the area. And changing one house would destroy that character. And would be something I think the estate would reject.
Some of this might theoretical in 20 or 30 years when we're, I mean, I'm just saying like that because that's, I'm not convinced things will move fast enough to prevent a climate emergency. So
Right now, we've got the definitive decision as to how we want to do it. It may be that it just gets imposed on us coming down the line. Okay, there was a question. In front first and then lastly afterwards.
Thanks. My name is Thibault. I've applied for a Warner Home grant in September. So I just last week I signed a contract with Retrofit Ltd and IZ Energy to install some solar panels, because that was the decision that the Retrofit SSO kind of came up with. And I just had some questions like, okay, so it's on a flat roof, so it's going to be fixed on there or I was told it might be just weight, or maybe it could be fixed with galvanized fixings. And I was just had like some questions. Okay, how is that? You know, is in the long term, how is this gonna work in terms of you know, the wind catching the solar panels, or is this definitely a good thing for the building aside from, you know, saving energy? And my questions were because of the haste, like apparent haste of those contractors to kind of get me to sign the contract, and the discrepancies between, let's say, Retrofit LTD, which kind of gave quite a detailed quote of the works, but then IZ Energy, where are subcontractors which deal with and some other subcontractors, and their contract was a very genuine one without being specific about those solar panels. It was more about like heat pumps or other kind of energy saving measures. And they said, oh, just don't worry, that's just a generic contract, that's fine, just sign it so we can get the funding. And so I just had kind of a little bit of concern between, well, there's an opportunity here to make some quick business with these grants, you know, so the subcontractors kind of, okay, need to generate those contracts, and we'll see later how to implement them, hopefully in the best possible way, you know, in long term. But I'm not too convinced about that. So, you know, with your idea of kind of doing, you know, long term, big scale planning, how does that work with the communication with the, you know, like each kind of dweller, and to just make sure it's in kind of everybody's best interest, speed and wind.
Good answer. I think this is a situation that's evolving, and you unfortunately have a responsibility to do quite a bit of research to figure out if that's the best contractor. You're doing this on a flat roof, is that what you're saying? Right. If normally people do it on a slope roof, so you don't get the wind uplift. On a flat roof, you have problems with uplift. So normally panels are about 30 degrees, and so the wind can come under an uplift. But there's a system called tub mounted, where you have a tub and it sits so there's no air going underneath, and they're weighted down with sandbags. I think the tubs are plastic, but it is quite an interesting system because they're not fixed through the membrane of the roof. They're just weighted down, and there's a tub so the wind doesn't come up underneath and lift them up. That's one possibility. There are other things. There's another thing of doing them much a smaller slope. It's called an east-west system, where you have a very little pitch. They're almost flat, and you cover the entire roof with panels. And the whole idea is you pitch them slightly to the east and slightly to the west, and you do these with a very small place to walk between. You don't get uplift because they're very shallow. And the idea with that is that the panels won't generate as much in midday, but they generate more in the morning and more at night. And those actually are times when you're at home putting the kettle on or before you go to work. And so you can get more solar panel coverage on the roof. It costs a bit more to install, but you get more coverage, so you can actually generate more energy than by doing the traditional 30-degree where you have to set apart because of shadows. So that's an interesting way. And there are companies that are doing this, and you can find out about them. But this is where you really need a retrofit coordinator, maybe help, or a retrofit designer, or the council needs to come up with people in council energy centers, which would have this advice locally. What's happening? You know, maybe we're hoping to see climate centers come about within councils, and where some of this information can be shared. We need to share more information, but there are solutions that you have to research on.
Tom,
Just a quick, just on that last one there about kind of climate hubs, etc.
Yeah.
In Southwark's subsequent climate emergency action plan, it was adopted in 2021. It was updated last year. 100 action points for short-term, mid-term climate interventions, and setting up a green buildings advice hub.
Yeah.
All similar is on the list to do for this year. So totally recognise that we need support and like guidance for our residents for routes within the borough, etc. So resourcing is a challenge, right? And we're working out how we're going to do that. But it's totally recognised that we need to do a lot more in that area.
Could you do it with volunteers? I mean, there are people out there who are willing to help staff these as volunteers. I think the council needs to work with residents who may be up for volunteering. We won't get there on our own.
I'll take that away.
If you go down to Guildford, the local community have taken over a disused shop in the middle of the shopping centre in the centre of Guildford and turned it into a climate advice centre with workshops and advice and everything else. It can be done, and there's a lot of people on board. Yeah. Robert, how's it going with Lambeth for the Centre of Excellence? What Lambeth plans are there for a Centre of Excellence for knowledge about climate change and retrofitting and things like that?
Charles, I'd say that was probably more a question for my colleague, Casting, who was here last week. I think just coming back to the point around volunteers and using to our residents, we did when we declared a climate change emergency in January 2019, and Lambeth was the first London borough to do that. We did then move on to forming a citizens' assembly and brought people together from around the borough to input into, in a similar way to Southwark, a climate action plan, which has recently been adopted. So very much at the forefront of any councils is using the expertise within the local community, within businesses, within local residents. So yes, I think that's very much a suggestion I'll take away and speak with colleagues in our climate change and sustainability team.
Thank you. That's it.
Hello, my name is Sebastian. I think you may have just answered this question, but I'm going to say it anyway. I'm looking to do a massive renovation on my house. I want to do air source heat pump. I'd like to do solar panels on the roof. I'd like to do batteries. It's an old Victorian house. I live in a conservation area in Lambeth. And the local chat about, the planning department won't let you do this. They won't let you do that. It's actually quite intimidating to even stand here on the brink of it. What I really want to know, and I'll take a one-word answer, is are you up for it? Are you with me? Will you let me do it? Please say yes.
Two words, no comment. No,
We have a climate crisis.
we very much ours at the LPA, as Tom and myself have said. It's so fast evolving. I think what I've took away from this is we do need to have internal expertise. We do need to have someone that can advise and retrofit. We're actually quite eminent from what Tom has said, that the fact that pre-advice specifically for retrofit projects is free and solid, and that's something I'm taking away. I'm going to think about that for a moment. We don't at the moment have free pre-advice for retrofit environments, but yes, I think that's a really good idea. So watch this space.